Hello and welcome to another show. It's me, Josh, again. I hope you've all had a fantastic week and it's good to have you all back again. So, there's a couple of things I want to talk about this week. The first one I want to get into is, strangely enough, relationships, which is something that I've talked about this pretty extensively in my personal life with other people through family and friends and whatnot, but I find it's a bit of an odd one to throw onto the show. But I did have to go into this though, because I was thinking about it last night about what's normal and what people sort of think is normal. Because I think I've got probably a very different take on this than what a lot of people have. So, a bit of background on me. I don't want to go too much into my personal life because it's not really relevant to any of this, but I've been in a relationship for probably the past maybe 10 years now. It's going on a while and it's probably not the most conventional relationship. We don't really celebrate anniversaries or anything like that. We've never really done much in terms of birthdays or Christmases. We're not really typical traditional relationships. But then again, like I don't think that's necessarily bad. My mentality has always been that in terms of gifts and all that kind of trivial stuff, we don't necessarily need just one day a year to do it. So for us, we try and think about it as like it's all the little things that you can do more often. You know, if you can spend time, say, whenever you can make that time, if you can do that, then that's sometimes enough. It's the little things, not necessarily just a gift that you can give every so often. But the big thing I want to talk about in all of this is really what defines a relationship and what's normal. Because I often hear these phrases that people often talk about, which are things like, oh, a relationship is when you care about someone, which it is, but to the extent where they're your everything. Everything about them is if you're a man or a woman or whoever you're in a relationship with, they're your queen or they're your king. And you do everything for them and you sacrifice for them. And I think that is completely the wrong mindset. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But I want to go into a little bit of more of what I see as more problematic. Now, I need to preface all of this first, though, by saying, look, everyone's different. Everyone has a different relationship. And I can only talk from my personal experience. So if this is healthy for you guys, then that's fine. I don't want to try and put my foot into your relationship and say this is not normal or this is not good or what you're doing is problematic or anything like that. That's not at all where I want to go with that. Where I did want to take this though is sort of what I touched on last week, where I mentioned things about values and so on. Is this what you really believe? Because a lot of people have this idea of relationships that it's something you got to work at. It's hard work. It's difficult because it's all about needs. It's about, I need this person in my life. And for me, there's like an element of narcissism to that mentality because it's not really about the other person at that point. I guess I'll get into more of my mindset now, which is a little bit different. See, this is going to sound probably really, really harsh, but when I think of my partner, I think I don't need them. I know that sounds pretty brutal, but I guess you need to think about how I interpret that. I don't need to be with them. I don't need them to live my life. I don't need them to live with me. I don't need any of that. But I want to spend time with them. I don't need to, but I do it because I want to. I spend my time with them because it's what I want to do with my life. I look after them and help them out with things when I can because I feel I want to. It's not out of obligation. And I think when you've got a need inside, it changes the dynamic to be less about what can I do for them, but more what can they do for me. Do you sort of get where I'm going with that? I don't want to kind of come across the wrong way on this, but I think a big issue that some people have, and I think this is sort of being reinforced by a lot of older generations, because it is a very old school mindset of this stay together at all costs. But I guess where I come from this is because I've got a bit of experience in working with aged care and so on. I'm a nurse, by the way, just throwing that out there. And I've done my time in aged care, and I noticed something really interesting with a lot of much, much older generations, which is a lot of this mindset of you stay together at all costs. your partner, your husband, your wife, whatever, is everything. You spend your life with them. That's your life partner. Everything is about this companionship. But then what I see is when it gets to a certain point, when one of them passes away, the other one just can't function. And they go into deep depression because they haven't lived their life by themselves for the last 40, 50, 60 years. They don't know what it's like to even be themselves because they don't know themselves. They don't know anything other than who their relationship was, because their relationship was them. It was John and Margaret. That was them. John can only exist with Margaret. He can't exist on his own because he's never had to. And because he's been in this relationship for so many years, he's learned to adapt to this symbiotic thing that he grips to. And I just find that really strange because my personal opinion on relationships is until you love yourself, how can you possibly love... pardon me, sorry. Until you love yourself, how can you possibly love someone else? Because I think it's about giving, not getting. You know, it's not a mercenary thing. It's not about wanting someone to be wanted back. Likewise, it's not equally about just giving love at someone and throwing it out there and hoping that, you know, something comes back, because that's problematic in its own sense. You know, it's not like throwing people a compliment just because you want them to like you. That's horrible. But I just think that that what I think about is really, if your values align, that's going to be the main thing. So I think of it this way, that I'm happy by myself. And I have been for a long time. You know, I've always been a relatively solitary person. I love other people. I love hanging out with people. I love doing talks. I love acting. I like being in front of a camera. I like performing music. I like doing all these different things with people. And it does seem like on the surface I'm a very extroverted, you know, person who likes to get out there and whatnot. And I am. But in contrast to that, I'm also a very private person, which I know it sounds awfully strange to say that when I'm recording a podcast. But the thing is, I think that part of that comes to the fact that I'm comfortable with myself. And I could easily live with myself through the rest of my life alone and be happy like that. But I think being in a relationship adds to that now. I'm happy with myself, but then I have this additional person with me to spend that time with. And I do it out of a desire to, because I want to. At no point do I ever feel this, like I said earlier, an obligation to do things out of force because it's the right thing to do. And it's kind of funny because I look back at the last decade that we've been together, and it's kind of funny because we don't really have any arguments. We've never had a big blowout with yelling or anything like that, which I often hear people say things like, oh, well, if you don't argue, that obviously means you don't care about each other. I don't think so. This comes back to something big that I like to always think about, which is expectations. I think if you build a relationship, and I'm not talking about a romantic relationship either, I'm talking about friendships, I'm talking about working relationships, I'm talking about everything like that. If you throw an expectation at someone, this thing that you want them to do, it's not about accepting them. It's about them trying to measure up to some bar that you've set. And I think that comes back to this narcissism that people sort of throw into it about how it affects them, what they want someone else to be like. I think it's more about accepting people for who they are. And I think that's a lesson that you can learn from in all walks of life. If you learn to just accept people for who they are, you'll never be disappointed by someone. You'll never feel that feeling of, I wish they were the person I wanted them to be, because it shouldn't be about wanting someone to be a way that you've curated, a way that you want to try and fit someone into a certain box. That's a horrible way to think. And the simple way to look at it is, imagine if someone had that mentality about you. You know, no one likes being told what to do. I remember going back a long time ago, there was a lot of talk from family and friends at the time, this is going back when I was in high school, about going to university and studying certain things and post high school, wanting to do this or doing that. And it just felt like a lot of people putting expectations on my shoulders of what future they wanted for me. And it was never about what I wanted. And I think if you take that on board of imagining yourself in the other person's shoes, whether it's in a relationship that's romantic or a friendship, putting another person under that pressure, especially if you've been under that before, it's a horrible way to be. So, so I think when you start bringing that into going into like a romantic relationship now as well, I have a lack of a better word for it. I guess romantic's the only thing I can really think of that really summarizes it. But you guys know what I mean. I think values are an equally important thing too. If anything, I would say values are the only thing that matters, because they're the foundation that everything is laid on. Even think about things like ground rules, as people call them, because every relationship's different, and normal is really just another word for what works for you. But it takes two people to be in a relationship, but if those values aren't aligned, you guys aren't going to respect the same things. And that's going to be a big problem, because it's going to be like forcing a square peg into a round hole. It's not going to work, and you're going to try and make it work, and you're going to try and fix this so it does work, but every time you put another band-aid on that, it's just covering up another scar. It's not the same. So I think that's something to really, really take on board. It can be a struggle when you're trying to make something work that shouldn't, but I think a lot of those times people kind of know that deep down, at least I've felt this in friendships as well, that deep down when it is a struggle to keep that friendship going, you got to ask yourself, why am I trying to keep this working? If all the signs are showing that it's not working, why? Am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for them? Who's benefiting out of this? Because if you're doing this for you, then that says more about you than it does about the other person. And you got to think as well, like, all right, let's say this relationship's not working. Ask yourself why it should work. You know, what benefit is there to keep this going? What is the best case scenario? You might think that you care about them or love them, and you might really actually do. But think about why. Why do you love them? Why do you care about them? Is it because you're a person with a big heart with a lot of love to give? Or is it because you can't stand being alone? And that loneliness eats at you every single day. And the only reason you're with them is because you can't stand that feeling, because you don't know how to function without them. If that's how you feel, I got a reality check for you. You are in no place to be in a relationship. And look, that's just my opinion. For some people are just dependent by nature, and this works for them. Some people just have a big heart and want to love, and some people just need to be loved, and maybe those types of people work together. Maybe. I'm not a relationship psychologist, so I can't give you a definitive answer. And that's why I prefaced this earlier on by saying this is just my opinion. So take that with a pinch of salt. But it is something I have a big passion for, because it's one of those things that I think I'm pretty good at that. I think I'm pretty good at making friends. And I think I'm pretty good in relationships too. My track record's anything to go by. But speaking of things that, about skills and whatnot, I've been struggling with guitar. That's something that I'm not so great at. I'm working at getting better and better and better, but I'm hitting these walls with it. Now, if you guys haven't checked her out, please check out Mary Spender on YouTube. She's got a fantastic channel. I've picked up a lot from her, and she's really helped with pushing me to be motivated. And that's one thing I wanted to get into guitar with, because about speaking about guitar today, because motivation's the other big subject I wanted to talk about. A lot of people, forget about guitar for instance, but think about anything that you're passionate about, something that you want to learn, or something that you're just starting out with. Whether it's, say, story writing, whether it's drawing, it could be doing it could be research. It could be anything. It could be starting a YouTube channel or a podcast or anything like that. Whatever it is, any kind of project that you've got, whether it's exercise. A lot of people wait for motivation. Well, I got news for you guys. Motivation is fleeting. It's a small microcosm that seems to come up every now and then, but not always at the opportune time. You can't rely on it. It's not something you can be dependable on. So that's why I say make your own inspiration. It's about doing. I heard a great quote from, I believe it was Jerry Seinfeld. And he has this, when he does all his stand-up, whenever he writes it out, he writes it on the same type of paper, this yellow-lined, like clipboard rip-off paper thing. I don't know what you call them. But he's got one of those, almost like a sketch pad thing, but for writing. And the same type of pencil he's been using for the last 40-odd years. But the thing is, because he's created this routine with it, every time he pulls out that, it gets him into that mindset of being able to just jump straight into it. Arnold Schwarzenegger's the same. In all of the years of working out at the gym and whatnot and bodybuilding, remember a quote from him. I'm going to massacre this quote. But it's basically along the lines of, if he thinks about the task and thinks about doing something like working out or whatnot, he'll go through all the steps in his head and then he won't do it. Or he won't want to do it. So instead, what he does is focus on one step at a time. And that's when he gets up, he gets on his bike and he rides to the gym. Makes that the first thing he does every single morning. And when he's on that bike riding to the gym, he can think about all the reason that he doesn't want to go to the gym and work out on his way there. But you know what? When he gets to the gym, you're already at step 2. Well, I'm here, so I may as well work out. And that's about generating your own motivation. Because you can't just wait to be inspired by something, because what happens if that inspiration doesn't come? And I know what that's like personally. I've had writer's block with things as well, and it's hard. I'll let you in on something. I've been writing this script for, it's probably been the better part of maybe 5 years. It's a sitcom that I've been working on. And look, I've thought about throwing in the towel on it a few times, but I learned something a while ago. If you want to work on something, you just need to do it. To throw out another quote, I remember it was Seth Rogen who actually said this too. He was talking about writing, and he said something that was quite profound, I thought, which was, you just need to just do it. If you want to be a writer, you do it by writing. And yeah, it's going to be rough at first. It's like turning on a rusty tap. It is just going to be just a whole bunch of crappy water that's coming out of it. It's going to be just a lot of rusty brown crap that comes out of that tap. But the longer that keeps going, eventually it's going to start get patches of clear in it. And you're going to have these peaks and valleys in there. You're going to have these patches of rusty crap, but it's going to be broken up by clean water every so on. But then eventually, you're going to get to the other end of that, where it's going to be mainly clear water with just patches of rust in it, until eventually it's just completely clean. It's not just a metaphor for practice, but it's really about motivation as well. Because if you set a time and you decide that project you're going to work on, without even thinking about the steps, you're just going to dive into step 1, worry about step 2 to step 10 or however many steps there are later on. Just get into it and get that done. Then you'll find that rhythm. And eventually, you know what? It gets easier. The more often you do it, the simpler it gets. And the more you just jump into that mindset. And the second that you get there, let's say it's writing, for instance. If you set that time at the laptop to just sit there and write at 10 a.m. every day, eventually, just by conditioning, that inspiration's going to be there. You're going to be in writer's mode immediately. It's not going to come at first. It might not come for a long time. But eventually it'll be there, and it will build that enthusiasm. And I think that's really important. So for me with guitar, I'm still trying to get there. And look, it is hard to get motivated whenever you get it out, and I can feel my skills growing, but when I go to play something, it still sounds like trash, but you know what, I don't care. I'm trying to just enjoy the learning process more than anything. And it is frustrating. But the more you keep up with it, the more you'll learn. Like I admit, it is difficult. It's not one of those things that, naturally is going to come to you. Maybe it will to some people, and some people are gifted in that way. But anything like this, and I'm specifically talking about a craft, with any craft, they're things that you're not just born with. We might start at different places, but it doesn't mean that we're restricted to that. Just because you're bad at something now, it doesn't mean you're going to be bad at it forever. And bad's probably the wrong way to look at it. Just because you need more practice now doesn't mean that you're beyond learning. We can all learn. And I guess that's the lesson to learn. So the other day I was having a chat with a mate and we were talking about just stuff, and it's kind of funny because when I say stuff, I mean like objects, things we accumulate over time. And I was talking about how I used to be a massive Transformers fan when I was a kid, and I had so many G1 Transformers, and man, I miss them so much. And you're probably guessing what I'm going in to get into now is yes, I miss them because I don't have them anymore. Now, I had them in the garage and they were stored there for years and years, and I've been meaning to pick them up at the other house, but I just never got around to it. They were at Dad's place, just in storage for a long time. I had heaps of them. I think I lost a couple of them. I don't know where my Starscream went, but I can tell you where the rest of them went. But what ended up happening was we were cleaning out the garage, and I had them in a special, I don't know what you call it. It's like a big crate thing. It looks like a milk crate. I think it was just like one of those like IKEA type things, just one of those knick-knack things that you can put toys in and whatnot. And I had them all in this big, big, big basket. A bunch of other stuff was in there too that I wanted to keep too. Like I had this toy from Alien, and it was a xenomorph, and it was from this early line, which is weird that they would make a xenomorph toy for kids going back into like the 90s, considering what those movies were rated, R or whatever. So I thought that was odd, but in hindsight. But anyway, it was one you press this little spine column thing on its tail, and when you press that, it would split its chest and its back open, and its head would come off, and it would be like a dynamic kill action. It was pretty cool. But I had that, and RoboCop. I had a RoboCop one in there, and you'd press the little button on his chest, and he would say these lines. What was it? You'd be like, "Do you call for backup? Don't move." And then it would have the do 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 do. Except obviously with a real sound effect. He didn't actually make that with like do 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 noises. But I had all these toys that were in this big crate, and sadly, I went back the next day to go grab them. But with the skip that they had, my family mistook that for garbage, and they chucked that in the skip, and away went all my G1 Transformers. Like everything, like Prime went with them. I don't think Starscream was in there, but I think I lost him a long time ago. But oh my god, I had all of this. Not the yeah, the Stunticons, not the Constructicons. But I did have some Constructicons, not the whole set though. But I lost them all of them, all gone. And you know what I felt? I thought I'd be upset, but I wasn't. I felt nothing. I felt nothing because it's just stuff. It's not something I ever thought I'd feel that way about, but I always thought I had this big connection to them, but I guess I don't because they're all just things. They're objects. They're pieces of plastic. I care about my relationship with them because I loved those. I spent so many days playing with those Transformers. But, at the end of the day, it's just a thing. They're replaceable. You know what? I can jump on eBay and buy them right now, probably at an elevated price. But I guess I don't really want to. I don't really care. There's so many things like that in life I've thought about, where the memories are probably what's more important to me than the actual objects themselves. I mean, there's some things that have meaning to me that I don't want to give up, but those things are pretty rare. But you know what? Even if they did get lost or did get burned down in a fire, they're just things. They don't really matter. It's like the Mazda. When that car got wrecked, and I don't know if I've mentioned this earlier, I've actually had two MX-5s and I've wrecked both of them, so not on a great track record with that. So the story with the first one was it was a ridiculously over the top. peaky boosted thing with flares, and it was pretty wild. I'll dig some photos out sometime and I'll show you guys. But it was pretty ridiculous, and it was running 16 pounds of boost on a T28. So if you guys know what that means, it was pretty quick, and it shot up there really fast. And I remember I got this wheel alignment probably the weekend before it got wrecked. And the wheel alignment, I asked for, because normally I run the same alignment usually, which is zero toe with max caster, I think. And then I ran about 2.5 degrees or 2.3 degrees negative camber in the front and around 2 in the back, or 1.8, depending on how conservative I want it to be. Because it was just a weekend car, I could just throw it around the twisties and whatnot. But I thought I would try a new wheel alignment, and I asked them for the tiniest bit of toe out in the front and the tiniest bit of toe in at the back. Because I thought what that would do would make the car, grip into corners, turn in a little bit sharper, but then be able to be more salvageable at the rear end as well. So if it did go wrong, you'd be able to save the tail end. Here's the problem though. When I got it back from the alignment shop, the guys did the most cooked alignment I've ever seen. So they ran max toe out like a drift car on the front. And then in the rear end, they did max toe in. So if you looked at the car from top down, it looked like an X. So the rear wheels were pointing inwards and the front wheels were pointing outwards. So it was like bow-legged front and back. It looked horrible. And it drove absolutely terrifying too. So every time you went into a corner, it would almost want to suck the front wheels into the corner. And you'd end up with so much steering lock all of a sudden. Sometimes it would want to rip the steering wheel out of your hands as well. And the rear end would just light up. It was absolutely terrifying. But I got used to driving it in the 4 days that I was driving it. And then I did something really, really stupid. So for those of you guys who know, who are local to Victoria, or maybe you've been there from interstate or overseas, there's a place called Lorne in Victoria, and that's where the Great Ocean Road runs alongside of it. But there's an inland road that goes from Lorne out to a place called Winchelsea. Now that's called Deans Marsh. And as the name suggests, it is marshland. So you've got a big, if you're heading towards Winchelsea, on the right-hand side of the road, it's almost like a cliffside. It's a really, really steep hill, which is lined and littered with trees all the way along it. It's a really twisty road and quite a fun road. And then the left side, though, that's the big embankment that goes all the way up into the big hills. But because it's all marshland, that's all clay on that side of the hill. And then when it rains, that clay and that mud seeps onto the road, and there's moss that grows out there too, which makes the road very, very slippery. I don't know what I was thinking. I had a couple of hours before tea. I was going out to have dinner at a friend's place and watch a movie and whatnot. And for some reason I got this bright idea, it's a good day, I'll head down to Lorne. The thing is, it wasn't a great day for the rest of the day. I started getting down there. Lorne was perfect. I had a beautiful drive down there. And like I said, got used to driving the car with that weird alignment, and it was fine. And then I thought, I'll go back. Instead of going back the same way I came, which I should have, I went back through Deans Marsh. And it was the dumbest thing I could have done, because the weather started to go downhill. It started to rain, and it had rained the day before as well. And because it's got lots and lots of trees that cover the whole thing, all of that moisture that was in there, all the roads were still moist, still wet. All that crap all over the road was still there. Nothing had washed away. And then about maybe 5 minutes into the drive through Deans Marsh, it started smashing down rain, covered the entire road in water, and suddenly there's a thin film of water and mud and moss down this one, probably 3/4 way down Deans Marsh, and I happened to come around this corner. It was a really, really shallow corner too, which is so embarrassing too, because it seemed like nothing. And as I came out of that corner, the rear end just slipped, and the front of the car started to point to the right, to the oncoming lane. Thank God there was no one coming. And as it started to slip and to move over into the oncoming lane, I just didn't have the reaction time to save it. The road is so narrow, I couldn't just power on. And look, when you're in the split-second decision like that, you're just kind of just reacting. You're not thinking. You don't have that conscious time to think, well, if I was in that scenario, I would have done it this way. If I was a better driver, sure, but I'm not. And yeah, the rear end lit up. The car slipped over to the other side of the wall, pendulumed across the road, and tank slapped into a tree, and went off the side of the hill. And I'm lucky to be alive in that accident, and I'm glad that the accident happened the way it did and not worse. I mean, ideally, I'd rather the accident didn't happen at all, but it is what it is. And the second MX-5, that was another stupid one too. I was tuning the car on wide open throttle, and I slowed right down to around, it was like 10, 15 Ks, and I was just doing some quick pulls, and the car had a lot of torque, but this one patch of road had a big sweeper on it, and as I was going around, I rolled through most of the corner, and then when I got to the straight part of the corner, I went to put the foot down, and I eased it in from onto wide open throttle, but it had been pretty predictable up until that point, but I didn't realize that corner had a camber change in it. And as I did that, the rear end just let go for a second. And as it let go for a second, the front end turned to the left towards a parked car. But then the rear end gripped in again, and then the front washed out, like completely, and just aquaplaned, and then just sent it straight into this parked car. And that was the end of that. So that's a saga that's over and done with. So both of those accidents pretty much the same, which is sad. And I don't know if that says more about my driving or responsibility or whatnot. It happened at a pretty low speed too. I think the impact was about roughly 45, 50 Ks. It was below 60, that's for sure. And that was disappointing. But the reason I mention this though is because I thought I'd be more upset than I was. In both of those scenarios, I kind of just had this sort of, c'est la vie. It is what it is. And maybe initially I thought that was just a coping mechanism. Like I cared, but I didn't, I compartmentalized it or whatnot. But then it's only in recent times I've come to realize that, look, cars are replaceable. It's just stuff. These things happen, and it's not the end of the world. Sometimes accidents happen, but you can't save everything. But it got me thinking about people who really do care about stuff, and what the difference is between a collector and a hoarder. Now, with hoarders, that's a whole separate thing, and look, I know that is a mental illness, and I'm not going to go into this in terms of a judgmental way or putting anyone down who is a hoarder or anything like that, because I know it is serious, and it is something that is a really touchy subject too, and I don't want to belittle anyone, and I don't want to make people feel alienated by that either. But it did make me wonder though, because I was thinking about what it really means to be a collector, and when does it become a problem? Because I don't want to name any names or anything like that, but I've seen some people with some rather large collections, and I'm talking about like huge collections, like world's biggest collections of certain things, whether it's cars, toys, whatever. And I guess where I sort of stand on this is when it becomes a problem. Is it a problem when it takes over your life? When everything becomes, around that collection? Whether it becomes like, say I'm a car collector or a bike collector. If I'm a motorbike collector and suddenly I've got multiple motorbikes in my bedroom, and I've got them in the kitchen, and I've got them in the garage, and I spend all of my money on this and I'm late on my bills. When is that a problem versus when is that a passion? Because I know with some things it's acceptable to be a collector of, but then other things it's not acceptable to be a collector of. And what I mean by that is it's cool if I'm a car collector, or it's acceptable if I'm a stamp collector, but it's considered to be strange if I collect, pens, if I collect like biros, or if I collect screwdrivers or mouse pads, or even getting into more obscure things like tissues. Why is it acceptable for me to collect a certain type of something, but not a certain type of other thing? Because I find that really odd. Like, why one thing is socially acceptable over another? I don't know. It's I guess where I stand on it is that everything can be a problem when it gets to that point of your motivations. Because motivation really comes down to all of it. Like, are you collecting this because it's something that you care about, that you're passionate about, that you want because it's something you want to, you get an emotional response from, and it means something to you. It's a memorabilia. It's something that you can, that has a kind of meaning to you or something like that. Or is it because you just don't want to get rid of it? Because I think that becomes a problem, where the object itself doesn't actually have any significance, but it's the anxiety of not wanting to part with it. Because if it comes down to that, if it comes down to the anxiety of not wanting to part with that object, I think that's going to be a real issue. Because you've got to really assess why. What do I get from this? Why does it matter? And I'm not talking about like your nan's brooch, and I'm not talking about like the coffee cup that your mum used to always drink out of or something like that. I'm not talking about those things that have clear sentimental value. I'm talking about like why you won't throw away like a broken bin lid or something like that. But I don't know, it's just something strange. I've been thinking about that lately on it's just things that are socially acceptable versus not. But look, no one's beyond change. And it's kind of an interesting thought. It's a quote that I really like, which is that you're at no obligation to be the person that you were yesterday. So if you wake up one day and you start thinking, oh, well, maybe I do have a problem with this. Maybe I did have a problem with my relationships. Maybe I am dependent as a friend. Maybe I am doing things for my own self rather than a selfless act to do for other people. Maybe I am struggling with finding my own motivation, and I'm just waiting for something to happen and waiting on the right thing to happen for me rather than taking action. Maybe I'm not letting things go. Maybe I'm holding on to things, and maybe it's that anxiety of holding on to things that's holding me back in life. Well, I'll tell you what, nobody is beyond change. And at no point are you obligated to be that same person. Because if you want to, you can change. And look, change isn't easy. It's difficult. It's really hard. And sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world. But you're all capable of doing it. So I've got one thing I wanted to ask you last week, and I didn't ask because it just didn't fall into the podcast. It didn't really fall into any time that, felt appropriate to ask, but it is about action figures. I did mention them this week, so I thought it might be a good link to mention it. If any of you guys know, I picked up this action figure years and years ago, and sadly I don't have it because it went in that same skip, and I wish I had it, just purely for this one reason, because I don't know what it's from. It's, how to describe it? So it's like I think a 12-inch action figure, the size that they come in, the big ones, like an Action Man style thing. And I would say that if I dated this action figure, he'd probably be from like around the late 80s to early 90s. I would have picked this up in probably the late 90s at it wasn't at a Garrett's, it was at a Sunday market. All right, so just picture this, guys. Picture a man wearing a green sweater, like one of those military BDUs or whatever they're called, the military style Splinter Cell sweaters on, in a olive drab color. His head, pale white. I mean like paper white face. He has either silver or gold teeth, I believe. His hair color is slicked back silver hair, and I'm talking like metallic silver hair. He has like a Fu Manchu style mustache for some reason. Silver. His eyes are completely red. No pupils or anything, like no iris or anything, but just like a single dot in the center of his fully red eyes. Angry facial expression, showing his, I believe they were yellow teeth, in like a gritted teeth, and I think he had like a skeleton nose, but no other skeletal features. He was wearing like cowboy style gauntlet type gloves that were brown, I believe, and cowboy boots as well. And then the big defining thing is he had a blue jetpack that was all one color plastic blue. And for some reason, he had like a switch on the back of the jetpack which went through into his back, and you press it, and he raises his arm, which looked like it was like a raising his arm to fire a pistol, but it kind of raised a little bit too high, slightly above his head. So I don't know if it was like a punch or like a pistol shot or something, but it always looked like he was doing a Sig Heil, which was horrible. But I wish if I knew what this guy looked like. Well, I mean, if I found a picture of this guy, I've been trying to for years, and I'm willing to even draw you guys a picture so you guys can find it. I've thought like, was there like a Rocketeer cartoon or something that this could have come from, or was it like a large GI Joe type guy? I don't know. Or is it from like Mask or one of these weird 80s shows? I have no idea. So that's something for you guys to help me out with. If you can, that would be amazing. But I'll try and include some photos in future and draw something up for you guys. Now, in terms of the future of this show and this channel, what I wanted to try and expand on, I think I mentioned this in the first or second episode, but I want to give you a bit of a guide of what I want to do in future. So we've got our audio journals and so on like we're doing now, but what I want to do is expand on this, and when the time comes, I did mention doing things like a let's play or long play in the last episode with a few different games, and I've got a list of games that I want to do. Now those I'll probably be doing with a guest. I would like to run a couple of different guest shows. So that's one big thing I want to do in future. There is going to be a car build section. At the moment, that's on standstill for now because I don't have the funds to really get that off the ground. When I do though, and when I can get that MX-5 assessed, we will be going through a build on that one. Now, it's going to be a pretty lengthy one too, and I'll be documenting the whole thing too. So that'll be fantastic. I'm really eager to get into that. But at the moment, there's no point starting that because I just don't have the resources to continue it. So that's going to wait until things sort of change financially on my end. So in terms of motorbike content as well, I did actually want to go into a little bit of that too today, just really mildly before I duck off. So I often go out to a same car park to practice. It's not always the greatest car park because it has got painted lines which are painted in that, that silicon type paint where it's a little bit slippery. And sometimes I've had the rear wheel wash out a little bit on it, but I found that if you're consistent with your throttle control, it's not too bad. But with the new sprocket, it's a little bit dicey, so I don't really want to slip on that. But I'm looking for another car park. But what I would like to do is bring out the tripod and do some exercise videos, do some drills, and not just show you guys what I'm working on or do any tutorials or anything like that, because I am not a motorcycle trainer. I am not a motorcycle coach or anything like that, and I do not at all claim to be or anything like that. But what I did want to show you is, based on the knowledge that I've learned from other people and other people's exercises, what I'm practicing, how I practice, and where I'm at and what I've done to get to this level. So I think that'd be a quite good one to go through. But anyway, if you guys have anything specific that you want me to talk about in future, or if you got any questions or anything like that, I would love you guys to comment below. And until then, I guess I'll leave you to it. Have a fantastic week, and I will see you guys again next week. Catch ya.